The late-night hospital corridor was eerily silent. My hand, gripping a scalpel, trembled. Getting cold feet? Li Chengxun, my colleague, chuckled. I shook my head. Just remembering my first surgery, 20 years ago. A familiar figure emerged from the far end of the corridor, someone I never expected to see again. Elegant as ever, time seemed to have left no mark on her. Long time no see, doctor, she said softly. This time, it's my turn to repay you. Who could have imagined that 20 years later, I would be lying on an operating table, a patient under her care? A doctor's hands cannot foresee the future. I opened my eyes to the pungent smell of antiseptic. The LED lights above the operating table glared, a blinding white, just like the first time I stepped into an operating room 15 years ago. The light blurred my vision momentarily, a sensation that had become increasingly frequent lately, a sensation I'd been willfully ignoring. Dr. Chen, Ms. Wang's vitals are stable, the head nurse said, offering me a glass of warm water, her voice laced with reassurance. I replied mechanically, removing my mask, but not reaching for the water. Ms. Wang, a young ballerina. A shattered tibia during a jump. It should have been a routine surgery, moderately challenging, well within my capabilities, honed over a decade of practice. But during the operation, my vision blurred. The skeletal structure shimmered and wavered. In that fleeting moment of disorientation, my hand trembled. The steel pin deviated from the optimal position by 0.3 millimeters. 0.3 millimeters. Insignificant to most, perhaps. But for a ballerina, it could mean the end of her career. Chengxun, you should rest. Li Chengxun, my best friend from medical school and now the chief neurosurgeon, had entered the operating room unnoticed. I shook my head and walked to the sink, scrubbing my hands vigorously. The stinging antiseptic intensified the discomfort in my eyes, but I needed the sharp sensation to keep myself alert. Xiao Yuan, you're pushing yourself too hard, Li Chengxun leaned against the doorframe, his voice filled with concern. This is your 28th surgery this month. The workload isn't the problem. I stared at my hands that had performed countless miracles, hands once hailed as the golden hands of orthopedics. The problem is. The words caught in my throat. How could I tell my best friend that I might be developing progressive retinal degeneration? How could I admit that the pursuit of surgical perfection that had driven me for so long was being slowly eroded by time and illness? Xiao Yuan, Li Chengxun trailed off. I'm fine. I slipped on my white coat, preparing to check on Ms. Wang. Every doctor goes through this. The smell of antiseptic faded in the corridor, but the stinging sensation lingered. Hospital corridors were always like this, seemingly pristine, yet concealing countless untold stories. I pushed open the door to the recovery room. Ms. Wang was still under anesthesia, her left leg immobilized in a brace, the cast concealing my fatal error. 24 years old, a ballerina in her prime. I'm sorry, I whispered, so softly that even I could barely hear it. Back in my office, I reviewed Ms. Wang's scans. The skeletal structures on the screen blurred. I blinked repeatedly to regain clarity. This was happening more and more frequently, a recurring nightmare. My phone vibrated. A message from Li Chengxun, usual place tonight? Drinks till we drop? I didn't reply. Lately, I preferred solitude. Driving home, the rain started. The rhythmic sweep of the wipers echoed the steady beat of the surgical metronome. My apartment was dark. I didn't turn on the lights, navigating to my study in the darkness. I switched on the computer. The screen illuminated the wall, covered with medical certificates and awards. 15 years as a surgeon, striving for perfection, pushing my limits. Now, these accolades felt like a cruel joke. A surgeon on the verge of blindness. A grim punchline. I opened the latest medical journal, searching for solace in the research. The characters soon began to dance and blur before my eyes. I took off my glasses and rubbed my temples. The rain intensified. I stood by the window, watching the streetlights blur into halos. The hazy effect reminded me of the harsh glare of the operating room lights. My phone buzzed again. A message from a hospital nurse. Dr. Chen, Ms. Wang is awake and agitated. Could you? I took a deep breath and replied, I'll be right there. Putting on my coat, I paused at the mirror in the hallway. My reflection stared back, eyes tired, brow furrowed. I tried to force a professional smile, but it felt more like a grimace. As I started the car, the headlights in the rearview mirror stung my eyes. I knew it was going to be a long night. And it was probably just the beginning. What is most important for a surgeon? The hands capable of manipulating instruments with sub-millimeter precision? The eyes that capture every detail? Or perhaps, the heart that refuses to accept mediocrity? The rhythmic swish of the wipers brought back the memory of my first solo surgery 15 years ago. I had been so confident, believing that with enough effort, I could cure any ailment. Such arrogant naivete. Doctors, after all, are only human. We can heal the wounds of others, but not always our own. The rain fell harder. The most beautiful encounters often occur in the most ordinary moments. 7 a.m., the hospital library. My favorite time of day. No surgeries, no rounds, just the quiet company of books and the occasional ray of sunlight filtering through the windows. I had developed a new habit, browsing the latest medical journals every morning. Partly to stay abreast of the latest research, partly, perhaps hoping to find an answer that might never exist. Good morning, Dr. Chen, Ms. Wang, the librarian, greeted me softly. Today's issue of Orthopedic Frontiers just arrived. I thanked her and took the journal. My vision blurred momentarily as I glanced at the cover. I blinked discreetly. The episodes were becoming more frequent, but I wasn't ready to confront them yet. I settled into a seat by the window. The sunlight made the text easier to read. As I was engrossed in an article on a new minimally invasive surgical technique, a faint scent of jasmine drifted over. I looked up. A young woman sat at the next table, absorbed in a thick medical textbook. Sunlight filtered through her slightly curled hair, casting delicate shadows on the table. To my surprise, she was reading Orthopedic Surgery, a highly specialized textbook typically read only by medical students or specialists. That's quite a specialized book, I couldn't help but comment. Are you a medical student? She looked up, a faint smile playing on her lips. No, I'm just interested in skeletal structure. Her answer surprised me. Her voice was melodious, with a distinct cadence, as if professionally trained. As she looked up, I noticed her impeccable posture, her back straight but not stiff. Are you a dancer? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Her fingers paused on the page, a flicker of something unreadable in her smile. I used to be. A simple answer, yet laden with unspoken stories. I suddenly thought of Ms. Wang, the ballerina who might never dance again. The thought weighed heavily on my heart. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked such a personal question. I looked down, pretending to read the journal. It's all right, she said calmly. Everyone has their story. You seem troubled, Dr. Chen. I looked up, startled. Do you know me? In this hospital, few don't know the golden hands of orthopedics, Chen Xiaoyuan. There was an indefinable quality in her voice. Besides, your picture is in the lobby. I gave an embarrassed laugh. The hospital did have pictures of a few specialists displayed in the lobby, something I'd always found uncomfortable. Do you come to the library often? I tried to change the subject. Yes, quite frequently lately. She closed the book and stood up to leave. I'm Lin Yuchen. Lin Yuchen. The name felt strangely familiar, yet I couldn't place it. Wait, I called out. If you're interested in orthopedics, I could. My vision blacked out for a few seconds. When I could see again, she was already at the door. Sunlight streamed in behind her, bathing her in a soft glow. See you again, Dr. Chen, she said, looking back with a smile. I hope next time we meet, you'll have laid down some of your burdens. I stared at her retreating figure. She walked with the distinct grace of a dancer, yet there was something subtly off, as if she were carefully controlling her movements. Ms. Wang, the librarian, came to collect the books. That young lady comes here every day, always reading about orthopedics, she remarked, giving me a knowing look. Every day? Yes, for almost a month now. Usually in the afternoons, though. Today's the first time she's been here this early. I looked thoughtfully at the journal in my hand. The cover featured an article on the treatment of traumatic fractures in dancers, an article I had published last year. The sunlight was still warm, but a chill ran down my spine. This seemingly chance encounter, was it really chance? My phone vibrated. A message from Chengxun, Ms. Wang's family has requested a transfer. I took a deep breath and replied, I'll be right there. As I stood, I glanced at Lin Yuchen's empty seat. A note lay on the table, written in elegant script. Sometimes, facing the truth takes more courage than running away. The note was like a key, unlocking a long-forgotten memory. But what lay behind that door, I couldn't quite recall. The hospital archives were a repository of stories, each medical record a fragment of a life. The archives were quiet at night, illuminated only by dim emergency lights. I sat at the computer, staring at the patient database. Ms. Wang had been transferred, leaving me with a mixture of guilt and relief. Still here? Li Chengxun walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. I knew I'd find you here. I took the coffee and continued scrolling through the patient records. I couldn't find Lin Yuchen among the patients admitted in the last month. What are you looking for? Li Chengxun peered at the screen. A new patient? No, a mystery. I rubbed my aching temples. Have you noticed a rather striking young woman around the hospital lately? Oh? Li Chengxun grinned. Fancy you finally noticing the scenery. I rolled my eyes. It's not like that. She gives me a strange feeling. Like an unsolved puzzle. The system suddenly displayed an error message. I blinked, my eyes stinging, and the characters on the screen blurred further. Xiao Yuan, Li Chengxuan's voice turned serious. Your eyes. I'm fine. I cut him off, forcing my focus back on the screen. A medical record from 20 years ago caught my attention. A young woman, childbirth complications, attending physician. I froze. This can't be, I muttered. What is it? Li Chengxuan asked, curious. I pointed at the screen. Remember that emergency C-section during our internship? Li Chengxuan leaned closer. Of course. Your first solo surgery. Wow, 20 years ago. Yes, 20 years ago. I was an intern, on night duty, when a pregnant woman was rushed in, critically ill. The attending physician was unavailable, and the woman's condition was too dire to wait. It was the most important surgery of my life. The patient's last name was Lin, my voice trembled. She gave birth to a girl. Li Chengxuan's eyes widened. You're saying, that girl? I scrolled down to the details. The system crashed again, the screen going black. Damn it. I slammed my fist on the desk. Don't worry, Li Chengxuan said soothingly. I'll help you check the backup files tomorrow. My phone rang. A text message from an unknown number. Dr. Chen, could I have a word with you? Library. Lin Yuchen. At this hour? I glanced at my watch. It was almost midnight. I have to go, I said, standing up. See you tomorrow. Hey, where are you going? Li Chengxuan's voice trailed after me. The hospital corridors were deserted. My footsteps echoed in the silence. My vision blurred again, forcing me to slow down and steady myself against the wall. The library lights were still on. Through the glass doors, I saw Lin Yuchen sitting in the same spot, her posture as elegant as ever. Moonlight streamed through the windows, giving her an ethereal quality. "Why are you still here so late?" I asked as I entered. She didn't answer immediately, but handed me a book. "Your paper is very insightful." It was my published article on traumatic fractures in dancers. "Thank you." I took the book, noticing how cold her fingers were. "But that's not why you asked to see me at this hour, is it?" Dr. Chen is very perceptive. She smiled faintly. "I'm here to tell you that some memories are best left undisturbed." "What do you mean?" "Like the medical record of that expectant mother." She stood, her face partially obscured by shadows. "Some truths are best left unknown." My heart skipped a beat. "You." "It's getting late," she said, moving towards the door. "You should rest, Dr. Chen." "Oh, and," she paused. "You should have your eyes checked as soon as possible." I watched her disappear into the night, stunned. I noticed that the medical journal in my hand was open to a specific page. A faded photograph slipped out, a surgical record from 20 years ago, showing a younger me standing at the operating table, focused and intent. On the back of the photo, a handwritten note: "Some encounters require the right time." The moonlight outside was suddenly obscured by clouds, plunging the library into darkness. When the light returned, I thought I detected a faint scent of jasmine. Driving home that night, I wrestled with a single question: when memory intertwines with reality, when past and present collide, should we seek the truth, or let it remain buried? And more importantly, how much longer could my eyes hold out? The greatest regret in life is to say this is the end in one's prime. It was a rainy afternoon. I was making my rounds in the rehabilitation center when I heard a familiar melody, Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, drifting from the dance therapy room down the hall. I shouldn't have stopped, but the melancholic strain drew me in. Through the half-open door, I saw an unexpected sight: Lin Yuchen, standing before a mirrored wall, practicing basic ballet steps, her hand resting lightly on the bar. She wore simple practice clothes, her movements precise and graceful. But a closer look revealed a slight stiffness in her left leg, a hint of restraint in each turn. "No need to hide, Dr. Chen," her voice startled me. I walked in, feeling slightly awkward. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude." "It's all right." She stopped, but the music continued. "These movements are as far as I can go anyway." Her tone was calm, but laced with a quiet sadness. I noticed a faint surgical scar on her left knee, barely visible against her pale skin. "When did you have the surgery?" I asked without thinking. 3 years ago." She walked to the window and turned off the music. "An ordinary jump, an imperfect landing." I stepped closer. "May I take a look?" "As a doctor." She hesitated, then nodded. I crouched down and examined her knee. The scar was neat, the work of a skilled surgeon. But as I palpated the area, I detected a slight abnormality below the patella. "Does this hurt?" I pressed gently. "Not anymore." Her voice was flat. "I just can't jump as high as I used to." I stood up. "The surgery was well done, but I'll never be the same, right?" She smiled, but her eyes were filled with a quiet despair. "Just like some things, once lost, can never be regained." Her words reminded me of Ms. Wang. The same youthful promise, the same irreparable loss. "Do you miss the stage?" I asked. She walked to the window, watching the rain. "Miss it?" "Of course, I miss it. 15 years of ballet is in my blood. But sometimes, life is about accepting what you can't change. Just like doctors can't save every patient." The words tumbled out before I could stop them. She turned, her eyes unusually bright. "Is that why you've been reading medical journals every morning in the library, Dr. Chen?" I was taken aback. "You've been observing me?" "Just a coincidence." She returned to the bar and executed a perfect first position. "We're both searching for answers, aren't we?" Sunlight broke through the clouds, dappling her with light. For a moment, I saw her as she must have been on stage, radiant and powerful, and then I saw the present, the quiet resignation of a dancer forced to stop. "Would you like to hear my diagnosis?" I offered. "I'd be honored. Judging by the condition of your muscles and bones, while you may not be able to meet the demands of a professional dancer, you should be able to perform basic movements." I paused. "But you seem to be deliberately avoiding certain steps." Her eyes flickered. A doctor's eye is always so sharp. "It's more than just physical, isn't it?" She didn't answer, but performed a graceful pirouette. This time, I saw tears glistening in her eyes. "Sometimes," she stopped, her voice choked with emotion, "I don't dance, not because I can't, but because I'm afraid to. When you poured your entire heart and soul into something, only to have to say goodbye. That pain is far deeper than any physical injury." I understood her feelings. My own predicament wasn't about technical skill, but the fear of losing everything I held dear. "Would you?" I hesitated. "I mean, if you want to dance again, I could." My vision blurred again, more intensely this time. I had to grab the wall for support. "Dr. Chen?" Her voice was filled with concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I insisted, though I could barely see her. "Just a little lightheaded." Li Chengxun returned with bread and milk. He saw me leaning against the wall and sighed. "That girl, is there a story there?" "Maybe," I said with a wry smile. "But right now, I can't even make sense of my own story." 2:50 p.m. I stood outside the ophthalmologist's office. The lettering on the door was blurred, but I knew it was time to face this. Because people kept reminding me, in different ways, a good doctor must first learn to confront the truth. Even if that truth changes everything. Optic nerve atrophy. Dr. Wei's voice echoed in the examination room, striking my heart like a hammer blow. I stared at the medical report in front of me, the dense medical jargon blurring into an indecipherable mess. "The current degree of atrophy isn't severe, but it's progressing relatively quickly." Dr. Wei paused. "Shou Yuan, you know what this means." Of course, I knew. As an orthopedic surgeon, precise vision was essential for performing minimally invasive surgeries. Optic nerve atrophy meant my surgical career might be coming to an end. "How long do I have?" I heard my own voice, strangely distant, as if someone else were speaking. "Conservatively, 6 months to a year," Dr. Wei sighed. "If you continue with high-intensity surgeries, it might accelerate the condition." "I suggest you." "I understand," I interrupted. "Thank you, Dr. Wei." As I walked out of the examination room, I saw Lin Yuchen standing by the window at the end of the corridor. The setting sun cast a golden halo around her slender figure, through the glass. She seemed to be waiting for someone, her gaze fixed intently on something outside. I didn't want her to see me like this. I was about to turn away, but she had already noticed me. "Dr. Chen," she called softly. I stopped and forced a smile. "Miss Lin, what are you doing here?" "I'm waiting for someone," she said, her eyes landing on the medical report in my hand. "Did you get the results?" I instinctively folded the report and stuffed it into my pocket. "It's nothing serious." She looked into my eyes, saying nothing. The light of the setting sun reflected in her pupils, like burning flames. I suddenly remembered what she had said before, very observant. Under such a gaze, any lie felt incredibly feeble. "Would you like to get a coffee?" she suddenly asked. I wanted to refuse, but for some reason, I heard myself say, "Sure." There was a quiet cafe across from the hospital. We sat down at a table by the window. She ordered a mint tea, and I asked for an Americano. "Your hand is shaking," she pointed out calmly, as if discussing the weather. Only then did I notice that I was unconsciously fiddling with the coffee cup. Indeed, my hand was trembling slightly. "Optic nerve atrophy," I confessed. "I might have to put down the scalpel soon." She didn't show any surprise or pity, simply asking, "Are you scared?" "Scared?" I let out a bitter laugh. No, not scared. It's anger, it's unwillingness to accept this. I paused. Just. Last week, I was telling the interns that surgery is like a dance, requiring absolute focus and precision. It feels so ironic now. Yes, like a dance, she said softly, her eyes suddenly becoming profound. It needs absolute control. One wrong move and all the previous efforts could be wasted. I was taken aback. You dance? I used to, she said, her gaze drifting towards the window. When I was 18, a surgery changed my life. I suddenly remembered what she had told me before. Someone once used these hands to change the trajectory of my life. That surgery, I asked tentatively, what kind of surgery was it? Hip joint reconstruction, she said. That year, I was preparing for the National Ballet Company's audition, but I suffered a severe injury during training. Everyone said I might never dance again, but that doctor gave me hope. My heart started pounding. 20 years ago, soon after I became an attending physician, I took on a similar case. It was a young ballerina who had almost lost her chance to dance after an injury. I remembered her father kneeling before me, begging me to save her dance career. What was the doctor's name? I heard my voice trembling. She turned to look at me, a mysterious smile playing on her lips. What do you think, Dr. Chen? My mind went blank. The memory of 20 years ago suddenly became clear. That surgery lasted almost 8 hours. I remembered the girl saying to me afterward, Doctor, if I can stand on stage again, I'll definitely invite you to see my performance. Wang Yu? I stammered out the long-forgotten name. She shook her head. That was my stage name. My real name is Lin Yuchen, given to me by my mother. My hand trembled even more. So, you knew all along? Yes, she said calmly. From the first day I saw you in the library, I recognized you. You haven't changed much in 20 years. But why didn't you say anything sooner? Because I wanted to see if you still remembered that determined little girl. Her gaze softened. After that surgery, I did stand on stage again. I became the principal dancer of the National Ballet Company, performing all over the world. Before every performance, I would search for you in the audience. A wave of guilt washed over me. I'm sorry, I never went to see any of your performances. It's okay, she smiled. What's important is that you gave me the chance to dance again. Now, perhaps it's my turn to help you. Help me? I looked at her, puzzled. Yes. She took out a document from her bag. This is the research I've been doing recently. It's about the latest treatment options for optic nerve atrophy. From a research team in Switzerland. They've developed a new surgical method. Although it's still in the clinical trial phase, the results are very promising. I took the document. It was filled with dense English medical papers. Some words were already starting to blur, but I could tell it was a very professional research report. When did you start researching this? From the day I noticed your eye problem, she said. I owe you a dance career, now I want to try and give you back your surgical one. The setting sun had completely disappeared, and the soft lights of the cafe illuminated the room. I looked at the girl whom I had once saved, who was now trying to save me in return. Fate is truly a curious thing. That day in the library, I suddenly remembered the medical journal you were reading. Were you actually looking this up? She nodded. I wanted to find some hope before telling you the truth. I looked at the research in my hands, then at my trembling hands. 20 years ago, I used these hands to give a girl the chance to dance again. 20 years later, she wanted to use her own way to let these hands continue to create miracles. Thank you, I said softly. No, I should be thanking you, she said earnestly. Without you, I wouldn't be who I am today. So this time, please let me help you, okay? I nodded, feeling a warmth in my eyes. Perhaps this is the beauty of life, when we reach out to help others in their time of need, There will come a day when someone will light the lamp of hope for us in our own darkness. By the way, she said, getting ready to leave, there's a performance at the City Theater this weekend. I'm the lead dancer. This time, you must come. As I watched her silhouette disappear through the cafe door, I suddenly understood something. Sometimes, the moment the truth surfaces is not an end, but a new beginning. The City Theater was much larger than I had imagined. I sat in the third row, center, a seat Lin Yuchen had specifically reserved for me. Li Chengxun sat beside me, holding the performance program. You've really never seen her perform? He asked, somewhat surprised. I shook my head. Not once in 20 years. Then you're in for a treat, he smiled. Lin Yuchen is the youngest principal dancer in our national ballet company. I hear her Swan Lake is perfection. I didn't respond, just stared at the stage. After researching Lin Yuchen yesterday, I realized how many accolades she had received over the years. The girl who lay on my operating table 20 years ago was now a world-renowned ballerina. The lights dimmed, and the theater filled with Tchaikovsky's music. When Lin Yuchen appeared on stage, I almost didn't recognize her. The white ballet dress, the slender figure, and the elegant, almost flawless movements made her look like a fairy tale sprite. You know, Li Chengxun suddenly whispered, she still has steel pins in her right leg. My heart clenched. Yes, during that surgery 20 years ago, I implanted 3 specially made steel pins into her hip joint. Back then, everyone said she would never dance again. But now, she was displaying ultimate grace on stage. Every turn, every jump, seemed like a silent declaration to fate, nothing can stop the footsteps of a dream. My vision blurred slightly, whether from my eye condition or the surging emotions, I couldn't tell. On stage, Lin Yuchen was completing an extremely complex combination. Her movements were so fluid, it was as if she had never been injured. Look at that turn, Li Chengxun pointed at the stage. An ordinary dancer couldn't achieve such perfect weight transfer. Of course, I could see it. Behind every movement lay countless hours of practice and perseverance. She had used her own way to prove that a scalpel could not only heal the body but also mend a dream. The music reached its crescendo, and Lin Yuchen's dance became even more captivating. During a spin, her gaze seemed to meet mine in the darkness. In that instant, 20 years were condensed into a single glance. Doctor, if I can stand on stage again, I'll definitely invite you to see my performance. That promise, made so long ago, was finally fulfilled today. After the performance, Li Chengxun left first. I found Lin Yuchen in the backstage waiting area. She was still in her costume, her makeup exquisite, like a true swan princess. How was it? She asked with a smile. Perfect, I said sincerely. Even more perfect than I imagined. She smiled and picked up a folder from the makeup table. This is the detailed information about the Swiss research team. I've already contacted them, and they're willing to accept you as a clinical trial subject. I took the folder, but didn't open it immediately. Why are you helping me? This is a doctor's story, she said, gently touching her right leg. 20 years ago, he told a despairing girl that as long as she didn't give up hope, she could always stand up again. Now, that girl wants to tell him the same thing. I looked down at the folder, my eyes stinging. But, the risks are high, right? Yes, the success rate is only 60%, she said candidly. But 20 years ago, my surgery only had a 40% success rate. I was stunned. That surgery truly did only have a 40% chance of success. But I never thought she knew that number. My father told me, she seemed to read my thoughts. He said that back then, all the doctors shook their heads, but you were willing to try. You said that 40% hope was better than 0 despair. I remembered. Those were my words to her father before the surgery. So, she looked into my eyes, now it's your turn to choose. 60% hope, will you take it? I was silent. As a doctor, I understood the risks of such experimental treatments. But as a physician who didn't want to put down his scalpel, How could I not long for this opportunity? The surgery is next month, she continued. If you decide to go to Switzerland, I can help you arrange. Wait, I interrupted, next month? Don't you have performances? I've requested a leave of absence, she said calmly. I'm going to Switzerland with you. Why? Because 20 years ago, you didn't give up on me, she smiled, her eyes as bright as the stage lights. This time, it's my turn to protect your dream. I felt a lump in my throat. 20 years ago, I used a scalpel to prolong a girl's dance dream. 20 years later, she was going to use her own way to help me preserve my right to hold a scalpel. This must be fate's most wonderful arrangement. When we think we are saving others, we are also shaping our own future selves. Okay, I finally said the word. Let's go to Switzerland together. She smiled happily, like the girl who cried tears of joy after her successful surgery. I knew that on this stage of life, we take turns being each other's audience and protagonist. And now, it was my turn to rebuild my own dream. Are you crazy? Li Chengxun sat in my office, holding the surgical schedule I had just given him. What's wrong? I continued to organize the medical records on my desk, knowing full well why he was reacting this way. What's wrong? He slammed the schedule on the table. We're leaving for Switzerland next week, and you're still taking on so many surgeries? I stopped what I was doing and looked up at him. Precisely because I'm leaving, these surgeries can't be postponed. The office fell into a brief silence. The sound of an ambulance siren wafted in from outside, passing through the hospital corridors and fading away. It was a sound I had heard countless times in my 15 years working at this hospital, but this time, it made me feel a tinge of reluctance. Shouyuan, Li Chengxuan's voice softened, I know you're worried about these patients, but you have to think about yourself too. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said. These are scheduled surgeries, the patients have been waiting a long time. Besides, I pointed to my eyes, while I can still see clearly, I want to do as many as I can. It's because of your eyes that you need to be extra careful, Li Chengxuan sighed. If something happens during surgery. It won't, I interrupted. You know me. If I decide to take a case, I'll see it through to the end. Just then, there was a gentle knock on the door. Lin Yuchen stood at the entrance, holding a file. Sorry to interrupt, she smiled apologetically, glancing at the tense atmosphere in the office. Is this a bad time? No, come in, I gestured for her to sit. Any news from Switzerland? Yes, she placed the file on the table. They've sent the detailed treatment plan and the materials we need to prepare. Li Chengxuan picked up the file and started reading, his brow furrowing. This experimental treatment has such a high risk factor? Yes, Lin Yuchen said candidly, but it's the best option right now. Are there no other alternatives? Li Chengxuan pressed. Like conservative treatment? Chengxuan, I interjected softly, we both know the effectiveness of conservative treatment for optic nerve atrophy. The office fell silent again. Lin Yuchen's gaze shifted between us, finally landing on the surgical schedule on my desk. You still have surgeries next week? She asked. Yes, a few complex joint replacement surgeries, I said. Patients who have been waiting for a long time. She didn't object like Li Chengxuan, simply nodding gently. Do you need any help? I was taken aback. You? I can wait outside the operating room, she said. I might not be able to help much, but at least I can offer some moral support. I felt a sudden prickling in my nose. This girl, whom I had once saved, was now offering to support me in this way. No need, I tried to keep my voice steady. You need to prepare for the trip to Switzerland. That's almost all sorted, she said. But you, don't you need some rest? I shook my head. Surgery is the best rest for me. Li Chengxuan sighed from across the room. You're still so stubborn. Takes one to know one, I smiled. If you weren't so stubborn, you wouldn't have sworn with me on that rooftop to become the best doctors. At the mention of the past, Li Qingxuan's expression softened. Speaking of that day, do you remember what you said? I do. I looked out at the darkening sky. I said, if I ever have to stop operating, it will be because I've treated too many patients, not because I gave up on one. Lin Yuchen suddenly said softly, just like I swore that if I ever had to leave the stage, it would be because I've danced too many dances, not because I gave up on dancing. The three of us exchanged a smile. Fate was indeed a curious thing, making us swear such similar oaths in different times and spaces. So, I picked up the surgical schedule. Let me complete these last few surgeries. It's not just a promise to the patients, but also to myself. Li Qingxuan still wanted to say something, but Lin Yuchen stopped him. Let Dr. Chen do it his way. All we can do is stand behind him when he needs us. Looking at their expressions, I suddenly felt an urge to cry. Perhaps this was the most precious gift in life. When you're at your lowest, there are always people willing to unconditionally support you, to accompany you. Oh, right, I remembered something while packing up the medical records. Lin Yuchen, how did you convince the ballet company to give you such a long leave? She smiled mysteriously. Well, I'll tell you after your surgery is successful. As night fell, the hospital corridors lit up with warm lights. I stood by the window, watching the people coming and going below. I wondered, this time next week, which hospital in Switzerland would I be in? Would the lights there be as warm as these? Dr. Chen, Lin Yuchen's voice came from behind me. What are you thinking about? I was thinking, I turned around, that I've saved so many people throughout my career, but in the end, it's a former patient who's saving me. No, she shook her head, you're not being saved, you're being repaid a kindness. 20 years ago, you gave me the courage to stand up again. Now, let me give you some courage, okay? I nodded, feeling a warmth in my eyes. The hospital was still busy at night, but at this moment, my heart was exceptionally calm. Because I knew that no matter what the future held, at least on this unknown path, I wasn't walking alone. The surgical light remained bright. I stood before the operating table, my gaze fixed on the surgical field. This was the third surgery of the day, and the last before my trip to Switzerland. The patient was a 16-year-old girl with congenital hip dysplasia. Dr. Chen, are you sure you want to continue? Nurse Zhang asked softly. It's been 8 hours straight. I nodded without speaking. As the lead surgeon, I knew I wasn't in the best condition. The fatigue from 3 consecutive surgeries, coupled with the discomfort from my eye condition, was affecting my judgment. But this was the last surgery, and I had to finish it. Prepare for incision. The scalpel gleamed under the surgical light. This scalpel had been with me for 15 years, witnessing countless rebirths. And today, it would complete its final surgery with me. As I made the first incision, I felt a slight tremor in my hand. This shouldn't be happening. As an experienced surgeon, hand stability was fundamental. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Dr. Chen, you're sweating, Nurse Zhang offered a piece of gauze. I didn't take it, just continued to focus on the surgery. I couldn't afford to be distracted. The most important thing right now was the young life in front of me. Like Lin Yuchen 20 years ago, she had her own dreams. Midway through the surgery, my vision suddenly blurred. The familiar dizziness washed over me, and the surgical field started to sway. Do you need to pause? My assistant noticed my unusual state. No, I practically forced the word out through gritted teeth. Pausing now would significantly impact the patient's recovery. I had to persevere. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. When I opened them again, my vision was still somewhat blurry, but at least I could distinguish the key structures. 20 years of surgical experience told me that sometimes, intuition was more important than sight. Give me 5 minutes, I told the surgical team. I need to adjust. The operating room fell silent, save for the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. I knew everyone was worried, but now was not the time to give up. Just then, the operating room intercom crackled to life. Dr. Chen, it's Lin Yuchen. I was startled. Didn't she say she had something to handle today? I'm right outside the operating room, her voice came through the intercom, with a slight static. Do you remember that surgery 20 years ago? You were also working for a long time then, your hand was shaking. But you said, as long as you could still feel the patient's needs, you had to keep going until the end. My eyes suddenly felt hot. Yes, that surgery that changed her fate, wasn't it completed under similar circumstances? You said that doctors are like dancers, they must maintain grace even in the most difficult moments, she continued. Now, let me see your stage performance. I took a deep breath, feeling strength returning to my body. Yes, this was my stage, my final performance. I would use these hands to complete one last reshaping of a life. Continue the surgery, my voice regained its usual steadiness. The rest of the surgery proceeded exceptionally smoothly. Every movement, every incision, was as if it had been rehearsed 1,000 times. When the final stitch was completed, applause erupted in the operating room. Beautiful surgery, Dr. Chen, my assistant said sincerely. I took off my surgical gloves and looked at my hands. These hands, which had changed countless lives, were now trembling slightly. But this trembling was no longer from fatigue, but from the relief of a mission accomplished. When I walked out of the operating room, Lin Yuchen was still waiting outside. Her eyes were a little red, but her face bore a relieved smile. Your surgery was truly beautiful, she said softly. I suddenly understood something. You were watching from the observation window the whole time? Yes, she nodded. Just like 20 years ago, when I lay on the operating table, watching you work so diligently. I thought then, so even surgery can be this elegant. I couldn't help but smile. Now do you understand why I said surgery is like a dance? I do, she smiled back. So next week in Switzerland, it's my turn to dance for you, okay? Looking at this girl I had once saved, I felt a surge of gratification. Perhaps this was life's most beautiful gift. When we use our expertise to help others, we are also sowing the seeds of hope for our future selves. Dr. Chen, Lin Yuchen suddenly said seriously, I've changed our flight to the day after tomorrow. Why? Didn't we say next week? Because you need rest, she said. You've done too many surgeries this week. It's not good for your health to continue like this. I wanted to argue, but she shook her head. This time, please trust me, just like I trusted you back then. Looking at her determined gaze, I felt a sense of déjà vu. When had the girl who once lay on my operating table grown up to be so understanding? All right, I finally nodded. We'll depart the day after tomorrow. Night had fallen, and the hospital lights were still shining brightly. I stood by the window in my office, watching the people coming and going below. This might be the last time I stood in this familiar place as a lead surgeon. But I knew this wasn't the end, but another beginning. Just like that surgery so long ago for Lin Yuchen. The departure hall of the airport was bustling with people. I sat in the waiting area, staring blankly at the boarding pass in my hand. Flight B375, destination Zurich. This thin piece of paper carried my last hope. Here, drink some water. Lin Yuchen handed me a bottle of mineral water and sat down beside me. I took the water, but didn't open it immediately. Li Chengxun said he would come to see us off. Why isn't he here yet? Probably stuck in traffic, she said, checking her watch. But we still have an hour before boarding, he should be able to make it. Just then, Li Chengxuan's figure appeared at the entrance of the departure hall. He jogged over, carrying a paper bag. Sorry, the traffic was terrible, he said, out of breath. This is from everyone in our department. I opened the paper bag and found a scrub top inside, with my name, Qin Shuyuan, embroidered on the chest. It was a tradition in our department, every attending physician had one of these. Everyone asked me to tell you, Li Chengxuan said, to come back safely. I ran my fingers over the embroidered threads, feeling a lump in my throat. For 15 years, this scrub top had been like my second skin. Now, I didn't know when I would be able to wear it again. I tried to keep my voice steady. Lin Yuchen took the scrub top and carefully folded it into her carry-on bag. You'll definitely wear it again when you come back. Looking at her earnest expression, I suddenly remembered something. Speaking of which, you still haven't told me how the ballet company let you take such a long leave. About that. She smiled mysteriously. Actually, I've applied for a long-term leave. What? Li Chengxun and I both looked at her in surprise. I applied for a year's sabbatical from the company, she said. There's an advanced ballet training program at the Zurich Conservatory of Music that I've been applying to for a long time, and I finally got accepted. I was stunned. Are you saying? Yes, she nodded. I'll be taking care of you while also pursuing further studies there. This way, I won't be neglecting my own career, and you won't feel like you owe me anything. I suddenly felt a prickling sensation in my nose. This girl, she always thought of everything. All right, Li Chengxun teased, looks like our prima ballerina was well prepared. Of course, Lin Yuchen said with a smile. This is a debt repayment plan that I've been working on for a long time. What debt repayment? I asked, puzzled. Don't you always say that a physician's mission is to help others? She looked at me earnestly. Well, a dancer's mission is to show people the beauty in life. 20 years ago, you used a scalpel to help me regain my right to dance. Now, let me use dance to help you regain your chance to hold a scalpel, okay? I lowered my head, not wanting them to see the redness in my eyes. Boarding announcement, passengers for Swissair Flight B375, please proceed to the gate. The announcement interrupted our conversation. Li Chengxun stood up and gave me a big hug. Come back safely, he said in my ear. Don't disappoint me and the guys in the department. I nodded, unable to speak. Lin Yuchen picked up her luggage. We should go. Watching their departing and waiting silhouettes, I suddenly understood something. The most precious thing in life is not how strong your abilities are, but that when you need it most, there are always people willing to face it with you. Dr. Chen, at the security checkpoint, Lin Yuchen suddenly turned to me. Do you believe in fate? I thought for a moment. I didn't before, but now I do, a little. Then do you believe in miracles? I looked into her bright eyes and suddenly smiled. 20 years ago, you were the biggest miracle I ever witnessed. She smiled too. Then this time, let's create a new miracle together. The sunlight streamed through the airport's glass walls, casting dappled shadows on the floor. Our shadows stretched out in the light, like two intertwined life trajectories. Fate is always so wonderful. 20 years ago, I used a scalpel to light a girl's hope. 20 years later, she will use her own way to help me find my light again. This journey is perhaps the best repayment. The autumn in Zurich was colder than I had imagined. Standing in the hospital garden, I pulled my coat tighter. It had been a week since I arrived in Switzerland, and all the examinations and evaluations were proceeding smoothly. Today was the final preoperative consultation, after which there would be 2 weeks of preoperative conditioning. What are you thinking about? Lin Yuchen handed me a cup of hot coffee. For the past week, she had come to the hospital every day after her morning dance classes to accompany me. Thinking about the healthcare system here, I took the coffee. There are many details that we can learn from. She laughed. Even at a time like this, you're still thinking about these things. Occupational hazard, I smiled too. 20 years of habit, it's hard to break. How is that girl's surgery? She suddenly asked. I was taken aback for a moment before realizing she was referring to the patient from my last surgery before I left. Recovering well. Li Chengxun just sent me a message saying she can already walk. That's good, she said softly. You see, this is hope, one after another, endlessly. Looking at her profile, I suddenly felt a sense of surrealism. The person in front of me was no longer the girl lying on the operating table 20 years ago, but she still retained that pure faith. Dr. Chen, a nurse approached. Dr. Weber is waiting for you. I nodded and got up to go to the consultation room. Lin Yuchen also stood up. I'll wait for you outside. In the consultation room, Dr. Weber was reviewing my examination results. This renowned European ophthalmologist had given me a lot of confidence over the past week. The situation is better than we expected, he said in fluent English. But there are still risks involved in the surgery. Are you sure you want to proceed? Yes, I answered without hesitation. He looked into my eyes. As a surgeon, I understand your choice. But you should know that if the surgery fails. I know, I interrupted him. But as you said, as a surgeon, I would rather fail trying than regret hesitating. He smiled. Well said. Then we'll start the preoperative preparations next week. When I walked out of the consultation room, Lin Yuchen immediately came up to me. How did it go? We start preoperative preparations next week, I said. Don't you have a class today? It's cancelled, she said. The professor is not feeling well. I looked at her slightly tired face. You've been working too hard this past week, attending classes, and taking care of me. It's nothing, she shook her head. Compared to your years of dedication in the operating room, this is nothing. We walked down the hospital corridor, sunlight streaming through the windows, casting long shadows. By the way, she suddenly said, there's a small performance at the conservatory today. Would you like to go see it? Are you performing? Not me, a classmate of mine, she said. She's also someone whose life was changed by surgery. I understood her intention. All right, I'll go see it. The performance was held in the conservatory's small theater. I sat in the audience, watching the girl on stage dancing ballet. Her movements weren't as polished as Lin Yuchen's, but every turn was filled with power. She was in a car accident when she was 12, Lin Yuchen whispered in my ear. The doctor said she might never stand again. But she met a great orthopedic surgeon, and after 3 years of rehabilitation, she returned to the stage. Watching the girl on stage, I suddenly felt a warmth in my eyes. So you're trying to tell me? Yes, she said. Miracles happen every day. We just need to believe in them and strive to pursue them. After the performance, we strolled along the corridor outside the theater. The setting sun cast colorful patterns on the floor, through the stained glass windows. Actually, I'm scared, I suddenly said. She stopped. Scared of what? Scared that after the surgery fails, I won't be able to see the smiles of patients when they recover, the joy of young doctors when they grow, and, you're dancing on stage. She was silent for a while, then said, Do you remember what I said when I first learned to do a fouette turn? I shook my head. I said the hardest part of dancing isn't the movements, but overcoming the fear of falling. She looked into my eyes. Now, please. Overcome your fear of blindness. Because no matter the outcome, you have already left eternal light in countless people's lives. I felt my eyes welling up and quickly lowered my head. It was true, over the years, how many people's hopes had I illuminated with my scalpel? And now, these hopes were returning to me in different ways. It's getting late, I suppressed the emotion in my heart. You should go back and rest. Okay, she smiled. See you tomorrow, Dr. Chen. Watching her retreating figure, I suddenly understood something. Sometimes, healing comes not only from medicine and surgery, but also from the warmth and strength conveyed by those we have helped, in various ways. And this is probably the most precious reward for a physician. The nights in Switzerland were exceptionally quiet. I lay in bed in the hospital room, gazing at the moonlight outside the window. Tomorrow was the day of the surgery, but I couldn't sleep at all. My phone suddenly vibrated. It was a video call request from Chengxun. Why aren't you asleep? His voice came through the phone. Tomorrow is a big day. Can't sleep, I chuckled. Isn't it the middle of the night for you? I'm on duty at the department, and it's quiet now, His face was a bit blurry on the screen, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Are the preoperative preparations all done? Yes, everything is going smoothly, I said, my gaze falling on the surgical consent form on the bedside table. Dr. Weber said the situation is better than expected. That's good. He was silent for a moment, then suddenly said, remember what the old director said when we first joined the hospital? I was taken aback, then smiled. Of course I remember. He said a good doctor is like a lamp, illuminating not only the patient's hope, but also the physician's own path. That's right, his voice was a little choked up. Over the years, you've been such a lamp. Now, it's our turn to light the way for you. I felt my eyes watering, and just as I was about to speak, the door to the ward was gently pushed open. Lin Yuchen walked in, carrying a thermos. Why are you here? I was a little surprised. It's so late. I figured you wouldn't be able to sleep. She placed the thermos on the bedside table. I made you some calming herbal tea. Li Chengxun smiled from the other end of the video call. It's nice to have someone taking care of you. I won't disturb you any longer then. Remember to let me know after the surgery is over. After hanging up the video call, the room fell silent again. Lin Yuchen sat in the chair by the bed and said softly, the students at the conservatory are all praying for you today. Thank you. I took a sip of the herbal tea. The faint scent of jasmine spread in my mouth. You should go back and rest too. You have classes tomorrow. She shook her head. I took the day off tomorrow. I want to wait for you outside the operating room. I put down the cup and was about to say something when she suddenly took out an envelope from her bag. This is for you. What is it? Open it and see. I opened the envelope and found a photograph inside. It was a picture of me performing surgery on her 20 years ago. The young me was focused on the operating table. This is. My father took it secretly, she said. He wanted to capture the moment that changed my life. Over the years, whenever I encountered difficulties on stage, looking at this photo would give me strength. I looked at the picture of myself, feeling like it was a lifetime ago. Back then, I too had countless sleepless nights, but never gave up my belief in medicine. Do you know, she continued, after the surgery that day, you said something to me. What did I say? You said, believe in the power of medicine, and also believe in your own courage. Her eyes glistened with tears in the moonlight. Now, I want to say those words back to you. I suddenly felt a lump in my throat. 20 years had passed, and the little girl who needed my encouragement was now giving me strength. Thank you, I said softly. Don't mention it, she stood up. Now you should rest. Tomorrow, I'll be waiting for you outside the operating room, just like you fought for me on the operating table all those years ago. As I watched her leave, I suddenly remembered something. Wait. She stopped at the door. Tomorrow, if the surgery is successful, can you dance for me? She turned around, a bright smile on her face. It's a deal. But this time, you have to see every movement with your own eyes. She closed the door behind her, and the room fell silent again. I looked at the moonlight outside the window and suddenly felt a sense of peace. Yes, for the past 20 years, I had used these hands and these eyes to help countless patients. Now, perhaps it was time for them to help me. I closed my eyes, and countless smiling faces appeared in my mind, the patients who stood up again after recovering, the interns who successfully completed their first surgery, Lin Yuchen returning to the stage. This was the greatest wealth of a physician, to sow seeds of hope in the lives of others, and then, when you need it most, to reap a harvest of warmth and strength. Good night, I said softly. I wasn't sure if it was to myself or to the lives that had been healed by these hands. See you tomorrow. Prepare for anesthesia. I lay on the operating table, looking up at the bright surgical light. This time, I was the patient on the table. For the first time in my life, I felt the emotions of a patient so clearly. Dr. Chen, please take a deep breath, the anesthesiologist's voice came. I took a deep breath, my nostrils filled with the smell of disinfectant. This familiar scent of the operating room, at this moment, made me feel a little strange. Start counting. 10, 9, 8. Consciousness gradually blurred. Before completely falling into darkness, I seemed to hear Dr. Weber say, "Don't worry, we will take good care of your eyes. Just like you've taken care of your patients all these years." Lin Yuchen sat on a bench outside the operating room, clutching the 20-year-old photo in her hand. In the photo, a young Qin Shouyuan was focused on performing surgery. At that time, he was the brightest light in her eyes. And now, she was here to wait for that light to shine again. Her phone suddenly vibrated. It was a message from Li Qingxuan. "Has the surgery started?" "Just started," she replied. "Don't worry, Shouyuan is such a good doctor, heaven won't let him down." Lin Yuchen looked at the phone screen, and the scene from the cafe that day suddenly appeared in her mind, when Qin Shouyuan talked about his eye condition. He spoke so calmly, as if describing a case unrelated to him. But she knew how much unwillingness and anxiety were hidden beneath that calmness. "Do you remember the scene when I woke up after surgery?" she messaged Li Qingxuan. "I do." "Your first words were, 'Can I still dance?'" "Yes," she smiled. "At that time, Dr. Chen said, 'Of course you can, but it depends on your determination.'" The operating room indicator light was still on. Lin Yuchen stood up and walked to the window. The autumn sunlight streamed through the glass, casting shadows on the floor. 20 years ago, she woke up on a morning like this, and found that she had been given a chance to stand up again. Now, she was waiting for the person who gave her hope to open his eyes again. "Do you remember what surgery he's best at?" she continued messaging Li Qingxuan. "Of course I do, joint reconstruction. He always said that every joint carries a person's dream." Lin Yuchen looked at her right leg. Although the surgical scars were no longer visible, she knew that the heart of a physician was forever engraved there. Time passed slowly. She looked at the operating room door, recalling every moment on stage over the years. If not for that surgery, if not for the doctor who firmly said, "You can definitely dance again," what would her life be like? Nurses came in and out. Every time the door opened, she couldn't help but tense up. But she knew that a major surgery like this would not be over in less than 6 or 7 hours. "Did you have lunch?" Li Qingxuan messaged again. "Not hungry," she replied. "You need to take care of yourself, so you can take better care of him." She knew Li Qingxuan was right, but at this moment, she just wanted to stay here and wait for the moment the door opened. At 3 in the afternoon, she received a message from her classmates at the conservatory. They said that during ballet class today, everyone danced for Dr. Chen. "This is the best way we can think of to pray," the classmates said. Lin Yuchen looked at the message, her eyes welling up. Yes, this was probably the best blessing, to convey hope through dance, just as he had illuminated hope for her with his scalpel all those years ago. In the early evening, the operating room door finally opened. Dr. Weber walked out, his face tired, but with a relieved smile. The surgery was very successful. Lin Yuchen felt her legs go weak and almost fell to the ground. At that moment, the scene of her father crying when her surgery was successful 20 years ago suddenly appeared in her mind. It turned out that the torment of waiting and the joy of hope realized were universal. "He'll probably wake up in about 2 hours," Dr. Weber said. "But it will take a couple of days for his vision to fully recover. During this time, his eyes need to be shielded from light." "I understand," she wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. "Thank you." "No, I should be thanking you," Dr. Weber said. "Your presence these past few days has given him a lot of confidence. As doctors, we know that sometimes confidence is more important than medicine." Lin Yuchen took out her phone and sent a message to Li Qingxuan, "Surgery successful." Almost instantly, Li Qingxuan replied, "I knew it. When he wakes up, tell him everyone in the department is waiting for him to come back." She looked at the phone screen and suddenly remembered something. By the way, I promised him I would dance for him after the surgery was successful. Then wait until he can see the world clearly again, Dr. Weber said. I believe that will be the best post-operative gift for him. Lin Yuchen nodded and looked at the darkening sky outside the window. She knew that the darkness before dawn was about to pass, and the physician who had illuminated countless hopes with his scalpel would soon welcome his own light again. When you wake up, she whispered, I will dance the most beautiful dance for you. You can take off the blindfold now. Dr. Weber's voice echoed in the ward. My hands trembled slightly. The 2 days of darkness made me anticipate the light more than ever. Let me help you, Lin Yuchen's gentle voice came from beside me. Her fingers lightly touched the edge of the blindfold, as gentle as if handling a precious work of art. The blindfold was slowly removed, but I didn't open my eyes immediately. At this moment, I suddenly understood why some patients hesitate at important moments. Don't be nervous, Dr. Weber said. Take it slowly. I took a deep breath and slowly opened my eyes. At first, everything was blurry, as if looking through frosted glass, with intertwined light and shadows and unclear outlines. I blinked, and my vision gradually became clearer. The curtains in the ward were drawn open a crack, and soft sunlight streamed in. I saw Dr. Weber's concerned gaze, saw the tears glistening in Lin Yuchen's eyes, and even saw a cloud floating outside the window. Can you see me clearly? Dr. Weber asked. I nodded, feeling my eyes welling up. Clearer than before. He smiled with relief. Congratulations, the surgery was very successful. Of course, you still need to take good care of yourself for the next 2 weeks, avoiding strenuous exercise and strong light. I understand, I said, my gaze falling on the photo on the bedside table. In the photo, a young me was focused on performing surgery, and now I could finally see the scene clearly again. I'm going to prescribe some post-operative medication, Dr. Weber said, gently closing the door behind him. The ward was left with just me and Lin Yuchen. She stood by the window, the sunlight outlining her slender figure with a golden edge. Do you remember our agreement? She suddenly asked. I do. You said you would dance for me after the surgery was successful. But not now, she smiled. I want you to see my most beautiful dance with the clearest vision when your eyes are completely recovered. I smiled too. Is this a threat to make me take good care of myself? What do you think? She winked playfully. By the way, Dr. Li and the others are waiting for your video call. Shall we connect now? I looked at the sunlight outside the window. Let's wait a little longer. Let me first appreciate this world that has become clear again. She nodded understandingly and sat quietly beside me. We sat there quietly, watching the sunlight spill on the floor, watching the nurses pushing medicine carts in the corridor, watching all the scenes that were once so familiar. Do you know, after a while, she said softly, 20 years ago, when I woke up after surgery, I was also like this, greedily taking in every detail. I thought then, how wonderful it is to be able to move freely. I turned to look at her. Now I finally understand too. It's a blessing in itself to be able to see clearly. So we both need to cherish this blessing. She stood up and took out a thermos from her bag. I'll get you some warm water. Watching her leave, I suddenly said, thank you. She stopped. For what? Thank you for your company during this time. If it weren't for you, I might not have had the courage to come to Switzerland. Do you remember how you encouraged me back then? She turned around. You said that courage is not about being strong alone, but about being willing to accept help from others. Now, I want to say the same to you. I smiled. It seems my patient is now better at comforting people than I am. That's because, she winked, I have a very good teacher. The sunlight gradually became brighter, illuminating the entire ward. I looked at the sky outside the window and suddenly felt a sense of rebirth. For 20 years, I used a scalpel to help patients regain their light. And now, in the darkest moment of my own life, I too saw hope again. This is probably fate's most beautiful arrangement, When we light a lamp for others in the darkness, that light will eventually illuminate our own way back. By the way, I suddenly remembered something. You said earlier that you would tell me a secret about why the dance company let you take such a long leave. Can you tell me now? She smiled mysteriously. Let's wait a little longer. When you're fully recovered, I'll tell you the answer with a special dance. I looked into her bright eyes, knowing it would be a delightful surprise. Just like this surgery, sometimes the wait itself is a beautiful anticipation. The recovery progressed faster than expected. 2 weeks later, during the follow-up examination, Dr. Weber gave the final treatment assessment. You've recovered very well, he said, looking at the examination report. Your vision has completely stabilized, and you can gradually resume normal work and life. I looked at the snow-capped mountains outside the window. The snow under the sunlight was clearer and brighter than before. During this time, the first thing I did every day when I opened my eyes was to appreciate this regained clear vision. Then, Lin Yuchen's voice came from behind me. Is it time for me to fulfill my promise? I turned around and found that she had changed into a simple practice outfit, the black dance skirt accentuating her elegant figure. Here? She nodded. I borrowed this rehabilitation room from the hospital. The lighting here is perfect for dancing. She walked to the center of the room, took a deep breath, and seemed to instantly transform into a different person. The radiance emanating from within reminded me of the first time I saw her 20 years ago. The music started, and I recognized it as a segment from Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. But she wasn't performing the original choreography. It was a new solo piece. The dance moves incorporated the elegance of classical ballet and the emotional expression of modern dance. I quickly realized that this dance was telling a story of healing. The initial pain and struggle, the confusion and perseverance in the middle, and the final rebirth and hope were all embodied in her fluid movements. As the music reached its end, she completed the last spin. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing her in a golden glow. This is my secret, she said with a smile. This is the new piece I choreographed for the company, Rebirth. It was inspired by the surgery 20 years ago, by the new life you gave me. I was stunned. So these past few months? Yes, I've been preparing this piece. The company was very supportive of this idea and agreed to let me take a leave of absence to take care of you because they know the significance of this work. She walked up to me. 20 years ago, you used surgery to help me return to the stage. Now, I want to use this dance to tell more people about the beauty and hope of life. Looking into her determined eyes, I suddenly understood the wonderful arrangement of fate over the past 20 years. The timid little girl from back then had now grown into an outstanding artist. And our story would be conveyed through this dance to more people in need of hope. Thank you, I said softly. This is the best gift I've ever received. Do you know, she said, while choreographing this piece, I kept thinking about one question. If not for that surgery back then, if not for your encouragement, what would my life be like? Every doctor faces this question, I said. We never know how a single surgery might change a person's destiny. Just like your surgery this time, she said with a smile. Sometimes the kindness we give will eventually come back to us in another form in the future. The sunlight remained bright, illuminating the tears in her eyes. At this moment, I finally understood a truth. A physician not only heals diseases, but also transmits hope. And this hope will eventually become the light that illuminates each other. So, I stood up. How about we go get some coffee together? I'd like to hear more about the creative plan for this piece. Sure, she said with a smile. I know a great cafe nearby, with a view of the snow-capped mountains. We walked out of the rehabilitation room side by side, sunlight spilling onto the corridor, illuminating our every step. At this moment, I knew that our story had just begun.